Hello, you're watching A News. I'm Dilek Tuna. Here are your top stories for the hour. Trump tells Israel to stop bombing Gaza as Hamas agrees to release all hostages. The Czech Republic heads to the polls for a second day in its crucial parliamentary election. And Armenia says it has agreed with Azerbaijan to reopen transport links as part of ongoing peace efforts. Donald Trump has called on Israel to stop bombing Gaza after Hamas signaled it would accept key parts of his 20-point peace plan. The group says it's ready to enter negotiations immediately for the release of all hostages after months of failed attempts to end the war. Let's take a look.
Hours after US President Donald Trump told Israel to stop its bombing campaign, several explosions lit up the sky over Gaza. This, despite Hamas agreeing to immediately begin negotiations to release Israeli hostages, in a sign that it has accepted some terms of the US plan to end the Gaza war. However, the group has not yet agreed to key issues such as disarmament or a staged withdrawal from Gaza, saying it wants further negotiations. Trump had given Hamas until Sunday to accept or reject his 20-point proposal.
This is a big day. We'll see how it all turns out. We have to get the final word down in concrete. Very importantly, I look forward to having the hostages come home to their parents and having some of the hostages, unfortunately, you know the condition they're in, come home likewise to their parents because their parents wanted them just as much as though that young man or young woman were alive.
Hussein al-Sheikh, deputy to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, wrote on X that they welcomed President Trump's announcement to end the war. On Saturday, Israel said it was preparing to implement the first phase of Trump's plan to release the hostages. Meanwhile, Palestinians in central Gaza expressed hope that the war could soon come to an end.
It's happy news. It saves those who are still alive. It saves the people, and thank God that they agreed. This is enough, good people. We are tired. I swear to God, we are tired. It's enough what we have lost. Houses have been damaged. Everything has been damaged. What is left? Nothing. We are living in a desert, but thank God after all.
We are happy that the war will stop because we are tired of hunger, displacement and bloodshed. We are tired of hearing bad news. We want to hear happy news, to regain the feeling of safety and, God willing, to return to our homes.
Israelis were cautious yet optimistic following Hamas's reaction to US President Donald Trump's proposal to end the Gaza war.
We heard many times we heard about negotiation or trying to ceasefire and bring the hostages. I heard Hamas is kind of agreed. I really hope it will be. It's not. I really hope it's not just they're not playing games, and I really hope to see everybody home.
The promise from Hamas was over and over again that they're gonna accept ceasefires and release hostages. But from the past, we didn't see them coming true. I hope this time is gonna be, they're gonna follow what they said. And I think ceasefires, release hostages is first before anything. But time will tell.
Turkey, which contributes to this plan, Qatar, where part of the Hamas leadership is based, Egypt, which borders Gaza, and the United Nations have also welcomed Hamas's response to the peace deal.
Pressure is growing on Israel as it faces more international condemnation and global protests after its military intercepted 40 boats in a flotilla carrying aid to Gaza. Officials say it's detained more than 450 foreign activists and that deportations have begun to send them back to their respective countries.
There were clashes in Sweden between pro-Palestinian demonstrators and police as hundreds protested on Thursday against Israel's decision to intercept and detain activists on a Gaza-bound flotilla carrying aid and medicine. The tensions led to numerous arrests. Demonstrations have erupted worldwide as thousands took their anger to the streets. It turned violent in Spain, where supporters of Palestinians and police came face to face in the capital, Madrid, when officers tried to disperse the crowds. Tensions also escalated in Barcelona, where international food chains were vandalized.
I'm hurt. I feel incredibly helpless. I feel anger and sick when I listen to people speaking on the TV or see Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at a summit saying that children in Palestine eat over 2,000 calories per day. How can they allow that man inside to say those things? The anger in our society has accumulated is here today.
In Italy, emotions also ran high as police used tear gas. Protesters in Brasilia demanded the release of detained Brazilian activists who were on board one of the boats in the flotilla.
Regarding the detained Brazilians, the Foreign Ministry has taken a firm stance. But this is more than diplomacy. It's about genocide. I don't think diplomacy is enough anymore. We need a firmer measure, like breaking off relations. That's what we're asking for.
In Paris, demonstrators gathered in front of the Israeli embassy to show support for Gaza.
I came to demonstrate in front of the Israeli embassy to show our support for the people of Gaza and to demonstrate that the French people denounce the genocide currently being committed in Gaza by the Israeli army.
Governments also responded to Israel's actions. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has urged Israel to immediately repatriate the detained Mexican nationals. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa urged Israel to immediately release South Africans who were also on the flotilla, including former President Nelson Mandela's grandson, Nkosi Zwelivelile Mandela. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan criticized Israeli aggression, saying it showed Israel's government has no intention of letting hopes for peace grow. Israeli officials have repeatedly denounced the flotilla mission as a stunt. Israel says it's defending itself against charges of genocide in the International Court of Justice.
Earlier, we were joined by Nuno Wanon Martins, political analyst in Lisbon, Portugal, who said that although the plan had been accepted, everything still depended on the release of hostages.
The peace plan allows Hamas to continue, not as a group, because their members have to go either into a political way and a peaceful way and to recognize Israel. They cannot continue as it is today, on one hand. On the other hand, to eliminate Hamas means that the peace plan, as I see it, will not fulfill. So I do believe that we have to go step by step. The first step is the release of hostages. Hamas have accepted it. And now let's see how long it will take Hamas to deliver these hostages, first and foremost, and the bodies of those who are already dead. And if this goes, then we go to the second point of the process, which also will take a certain time. If it doesn't go, then Israel will try to eliminate Hamas. The question is exactly the same. This is a war of already 2 years. Almost 2 years, because the war didn't start on the 7th of October, it started later, on one hand. On the other hand, it's very difficult for Israel to eliminate Hamas in Gaza because of the situation of the urban war that we are facing, on one hand, and also because of the tunnels. How long it will take, if it will take, this is a question mark, in my view.
The US military says it carried out another strike on a vessel allegedly carrying drugs off the coast of Venezuela, killing 4 people. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth posted a video online of the strike and said the operation was ordered by President Trump. He described those on board as narco-terrorists and said the vessel was transporting large quantities of narcotics bound for the US. It's the 4th such strike in recent weeks, part of what the administration calls an armed conflict with cartels. But critics warn the policy risks killing people without due process. Russia carried out a strike on a railway station in Ukraine's Shotska, killing a train en route to Kyiv. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky called it a savage Russian drone strike. Emergency services are at the scene with at least 30 casualties reported, though the exact number of injured is unconfirmed. Now Ukraine may have to wait longer for US long-range missiles as Washington continues to struggle with the government shutdown. Sources say the US Tomahawk missile shipments to Ukraine could be unlikely.
As the war grinds on in Eastern Europe, Ukraine is still waiting for long-range missiles. But that wait could be extended as Kyiv's biggest arms supplier, the United States, faces its own political deadlock. Discussions about US military support for Kyiv were frozen after the government shutdown on Wednesday. The Trump administration's plan to send Tomahawk missiles to Kyiv now hangs in the balance. According to a US official and 3 sources, current inventories are already committed to the Navy and other operational needs. The official said the US may look into allowing European allies to buy other long-range weapons and supply them to Ukraine, but Tomahawks were unlikely. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also expressed uncertainty about the delivery. Washington had previously signed a $500 million aid package for Kyiv last month, the first since Donald Trump returned to office, using funds from NATO countries. The move comes after the Kremlin said on Thursday that if the US provides Tomahawks to Ukraine, it would trigger a new round of dangerous escalation between Russia and the West.
Munich Airport has reopened after fresh disruption on Friday evening as both of its runways were closed for a second time in less than 24 hours due to suspected drone activity. German air traffic control says flight operations were suspended as a precaution. Police helicopters were deployed and passengers on some departing flights were told of the closure. German authorities say new laws may be introduced to allow drones to be shot down, while speculation continues over possible Russian involvement, something Moscow denies. EU ministers are meeting in Germany to discuss tighter migration policies and rising drone threats. The talks are being hosted in Munich by German Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt, who is joined by Migration Commissioner Magnus Brunner and ministers from Belgium, France, Switzerland and several other countries. The meeting follows repeated drone sightings in Western Germany, which forced Munich Airport to close twice in recent days, underlining growing security concerns. Dobrindt told reporters that ministers will address both migration and anti-drone measures, while discussions on so-called return centres for rejected asylum seekers are also expected to feature prominently. And today is day 2 of voting in the Czech Republic in an election that could reshape the nation's political path. The vote pits Prime Minister Peter Fiala's centre-right coalition against populist former Premier Andrej Babiš, whose ANO party is leading most opinion polls. Let's take a look.
Voters in the Czech Republic headed to the polls on Friday for the first day of a 2-day election that could reshape the country's political course. The contest pits Prime Minister Petr Fiala's centre-right coalition against populist former Premier Andrej Babiš, whose ANO party tops most opinion surveys. I just wanted to ask our voters not to feel that we've won. We can easily lose as well. So I asked them all to come to the polls and support us, because it's very important. Babiš, campaigning in his Moravian Silesian stronghold, presented himself as the voice of ordinary Czechs struggling with high costs of living, promising higher wages, lower taxes, and reduced aid for Kyiv. He argued that the government is prioritizing foreign commitments over domestic needs. Critics say his platform mirrors Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's, signaling a shift towards a more populist, Eurosceptic stance if ANO returns to power. Fiala called the ballot decisive for the nation's future, urging citizens to keep the country firmly aligned with NATO and the European Union. Casting his vote in Brno, he stressed the importance of maintaining liberal democracy, backing Ukraine, and preserving credibility with Brussels.
And I believe that every citizen will use their vote and go to vote, because where the Czech Republic will head is fundamental and important, and it's not just about security. That is, of course, the primary task of these days, but it's also about prosperity, because if we shift eastward, our country will also become poorer.
President Petr Pavel, who voted in Prague, warned that even after ballots are counted, forming a stable government will be difficult.
Building bridges across those trenches that have been dug isn't going to be entirely easy. Similarly, it won't be easy to form a majority in the lower house, so I think the negotiations probably won't be entirely easy.
Polls suggest Andrej Babiš's ANO party could take more than 30% of the vote, around 10 points ahead of Prime Minister Petr Fiala's Spolu coalition. But even with a small ally, ANO looks set to fall short of a majority in Parliament's 200-seat lower house. That could leave Babiš reliant on fringe parties opposed to the EU and NATO if he wants to form his preferred one-party cabinet. For Spolu, the only path to survival would be if several small groups failed to pass the 5% threshold, a scenario that worked in their favour in the last election, but according to pollsters, is unlikely to repeat this time. As voting continues until Saturday, the result will decide not only who governs in Prague, but also whether the Czech Republic stays the course with Brussels or joins the ranks of Europe's populist challengers.
Japan is set to have its first female Prime Minister. Sanae Takaichi, a hardline conservative and former economic security minister, has been elected leader of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. A parliamentary vote in mid-October is expected to confirm her as Prime Minister. Takaichi takes over after the party's heavy election losses and vows to restore public trust, tackle rising prices and strengthen Japan's alliance with the United States.
Rather than being happy, I feel like the tough work starts here. All of us together have a ton of work to do. We have a lot of policies to execute speedily. I will keep my promises. We cannot rebuild unless we mobilize the full strength of every generation, with everyone participating. I will work and work and work and work and keep on working.
In October 1993, Russia faced its worst political crisis since the Soviet collapse. President Boris Yeltsin dissolved parliament after months of deadlock, prompting lawmakers to barricade themselves in the White House in Moscow. The standoff escalated into armed clashes with tanks and troops surrounding the building. By the early hours of the 4th of October, government forces stormed the White House, resulting in more than 150 deaths and hundreds of injuries. The crisis ended with Yeltsin consolidating power and the adoption of a new constitution, strengthening the presidency and reshaping Russia's political system. Today marks the anniversary of WikiLeaks, the controversial site that leaked classified documents and ignited debates all over the world. WikiLeaks was founded in 2006 by Australian activist Julian Assange, who has since returned to Australia last year after his release from a high-security British prison. From US military files to climate science emails, it rose to global attention, sparking debates over transparency, digital privacy and press freedom that continue today. So WikiLeaks, the platform, was officially registered on the 4th of October 2006, 19 years ago. But of course, it wasn't until late 2010 that WikiLeaks truly began to influence the global information landscape. The most consequential moment came on the 28th of November 2010 with the now infamous Cablegate release. Over 250,000 classified US diplomatic cables published in collaboration with major global media outlets. In view of some, that leak exposed the inner workings of diplomacy, revealed the private views of world leaders, and altered the way both governments and publics understand the balance between transparency, secrecy, and power. John Kovalich in California and Ivani Vasola, professor at the State University of New York, joins us now to discuss further. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So, John, what happened and what was the immediate geopolitical impact?
Well, WikiLeaks wasn't a switch, it was a rheostat. And while it had a creative moment, its significance, its impact, its relevance increased over time. And so what began as a noun, ended up as a verb. And there will always be, there will never be unanimity in terms of what Julian Assange and his team did during certain portions of WikiLeaks' life. Was good, that it increased transparency. It made people better understand what their governments, what their companies were doing, because they're always going to be, as we're seeing now in the Trump-Vance administration with the Department of Defense, they want non-disclosure agreements, they want polygraph texts. So there's been a result of what WikiLeaks brought to us, and one of that is a much greater divide between those who think we should know and those who think we shouldn't know.
Okay. Professor Ivani, let me ask you the same question. What happened and what was the immediate geopolitical impact?
I agree with the colleague that is with me in the panel. The impact has been significant, but the major issue remains, and this is the controversy about government secrecy and transparency. So Julian Assange, who now is a free man living in Australia, at the very beginning, especially 2010, with the disclosure, with the release of thousands and thousands of secret US government documents about attacks in Iraq, about violations of human rights of people in that country, Iraq, and also about violations of human rights of civilians in the war in Afghanistan. Assange justified all that as looking for government transparency. He was looking for injustice. But while several media organizations, major newspapers, advocate for Assange as someone indeed defending government transparency, the end of government secrets. There are still many people in the United States and the world that simply consider that what he did was a violation of the laws, and above all the release of government documents, confidential documents, what he did was a threat in the end to national security, and more than that, putting lives at risk.
Okay, and John, so 19 years after WikiLeaks was founded, what's the most enduring legacy, and what has failed to change?
Probably its most enduring legacy is it was a focus on curiosity. And yes, they were investigating, they were trying to grab documents, make them public, but it all comes down to a foundation of all these people were curious. They were curious about what they wanted to know more of what they knew, and they wanted to know what they didn't know. And that, I think, is a lasting legacy. What fascinates me about WikiLeaks is that here we are in 2025, and at its height, WikiLeaks didn't have TikTok. You didn't have AI. You didn't have the proliferation of use of Instagram and Facebook. You didn't have Telegram. And we'll never know how much more impactful, good or bad, WikiLeaks could have been had this all happened in the last couple of years, because the information flow would have been so much faster throughout the world that all of the information they compiled and they were leaking or publishing would probably have been a lot more transformative, because there would be so many more channels that people would be able to get the information, and there are so many more channels that people go to for the information. So, it's enduring, but as I said, it's gone from being sort of a noun to being a verb for getting information that others may not want you to have. But overall, I'm in the camp that I would rather have WikiLeaks have done what it did than not done what it did.
Okay. And Professor Ivani, what do we make of Julian Assange's moral stance? Transparency champion or irresponsible disruptor? Is his cause diminished or more relevant than ever?
His cause, I think, is more relevant than ever, considering what we are witnessing in terms of geopolitical disputes around the world and the retrocess or backsliding of democratic politics in several countries. Yes, I am in favor of more openness. Yes. Therefore, I believe that is relevant, this fight. And the fight is going on, again, between freedom of expression or keep government secrecy to protect national security.
Okay. And John, WikiLeaks transformed the leverage of leaks over states. In today's cyber age, is leaking still the most powerful check on power?
It is, because, when politicians, elected or appointed, get into office, they want to stay there. And increasingly, because of these new communication channels, these new communication tools, that they're increasingly finding it a challenge to control, AI being the newest. Governments are going to continue to fight any efforts, and politicians are going to fight any efforts, because what WikiLeaks represents, as opposed to what it is or what it was, is a threat, because governments, and we can even use celebrities, carefully crafted images. And as we see in some countries where we now have extraordinarily wealthy people who are entering the political process, who are already in the political process. And then they're using those resources to manage their image, manage what information they want the public to have. And unfortunately for the public, for voters, for taxpayers everywhere, including the United States. It is increasingly challenging for people to get information that they feel they need, as opposed to getting information that the people in power believe they're entitled to have. And there's an increasing distance and depth. And unfortunately, I don't think we're on a trajectory where that gets better. I think that we're on a continuing trajectory where it gets more challenging because we have heads of state and heads of government in many countries that continue to blow past term limits, blow past transparency and that. And so I'm unfortunately, I'm not optimistic, but what WikiLeaks did is, again, it was about curiosity, and the communication tools that we all have today gives people an ability to be curious. And that's a good thing, but it's going to continue to be a challenge between the governing and those who are governed.
Okay. And Professor Ivani, is there a thread linking the revelations of 2010 to today's information wars, from leak culture to cyber espionage, from trust in institutions to the weaponization of information?
Yes, certainly I think we can say that there is a link. While it's true that we have much more channels of communication today that didn't exist during the times or 2010 when WikiLeaks released thousands and thousands of government documents that were confidential. Yes, today we have much more channels of communication than in the past. But the fact now is that, as we all know, easy manipulated. It can be manipulated by groups in society and can be manipulated and is manipulated. These channels of information, they are manipulated by governments. I particularly see that we are in a very challenging about developments in this world and tech institutions. This is my concern. This is the work that I do in political science. Clearly, there have been attacks to democratic politics, backsliding in democracies around the world, and in one way or another, they are tied to the digital world.
Okay. John, with states now wielding both offensive and defensive cyber tools, how would you say the paradigm has shifted from whistleblowing to full-blown cyber conflict?
Yeah, now we have, state actors, as we call them, that are, engaged in profoundly sophisticated use of communicative tools and cyber tools. And that's going to continue to be an incredible challenge, because the people that are developing these new tools, and use AI as one example, even the phrase or the AI in itself continues to rapidly expand in terms of what it can do. And sometimes what it can do then becomes, you're less able to control it. It starts to think on its own. And so governments are having access to these tools that they never thought they would have, where not only it was, okay, let's find this information, or let's push out this information, let's find this leaker. Now they can, using AI, they can generate, as we've seen in, here I am in Los Angeles, there's been a controversy the last week about an AI-generated actress. Well, now we could generate Julian Assange in AI. And so for these governments, it's going to be, they have so many more tools, and they keep redefining which is one of the challenges Julian Assange had. They keep redefining what is journalism, what is espionage, what is a leaker, and governments continue to expand those definitions. I'll should end one thing, and that is, think about if Julian Assange had been arrested during the Trump administration, the second Trump administration. Given the way that President Trump is dealing with other countries, hammer, and the stick. Think about the Keir Starmer government in UK, and Julian Assange is holed up in that embassy. Do we really think that today Julian Assange would be able to stay in that embassy, or the government of Ecuador would be under so much pressure, threatened of Trump, threatened with tariffs, threatened with everything, that not only would they give him up, but then the Starmer government would also give him up? He wouldn't be in Australia today. He'd probably be in a federal maximum security prison in the United States. So and that's all been a part of not only the political process changing, but also all of these communication tools and how governments look at what Julian Assange did and how they define it. And there continue to be lots of controversies over, did he do something really good? Did he set in motion others to do good and get information into the hands of consumers, of taxpayers and voters? Or was this just an unguided missile that ended up putting out information that harmed people and killed people and that? We're just going to continue to have that debate because the differences that divide are just more pronounced than they were, back in 2010, 15, and 20.
That's a very interesting and valid point, I think, John. Now, my last question I'll pose to you, Professor Ivani. In response to WikiLeaks and more recent leaks, many governments have tightened security laws. Are we sliding towards overclassification and censorship, do you think?
I believe that several countries' censorship already exists. And again, I think this is unfortunately the trend. We are observing that there have been in several countries attacks to freedom of expression, attacks to journalism. Unfortunately, is this at the moment, and it's difficult to see how this can be reverted or slowed down in the short term.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much for joining us this evening, John and Professor Ivani. It was a pleasure talking to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Georgians are heading to the polls this weekend to vote for mayors and municipal councils. But the election is already mired in controversy. 8 opposition parties are boycotting, accusing the ruling Georgian Dream of undermining democracy and pushing the country closer to Russia. The ruling Georgian Dream Party has framed the election as a choice between independence and what it calls foreign interference. The election follows months of protests and stalled EU talks, and pro-EU groups are taking to the streets, calling the day a peaceful revolution. Syria is set to hold its first election since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, marking a pivotal moment in the nation's political transition. Regional electoral colleges will choose 2/3 of the 210-seat People's Assembly, with President Ahmad al-Shara appointing the remainder. Authorities say the indirect system was introduced due to years of conflict, population displacement and the lack of reliable data. Syrian authorities also decided to postpone the process in the northeast, held by Kurdish-led authorities, and in the province of Sueda, largely held by Druze armed groups, citing security and political reasons. That means 19 seats in parliament are expected to be left empty. As Syria, now under a new government led by President Ahmed al-Shara, prepares for Sunday's parliamentary elections, questions are being raised about the country's capacity to hold a truly nationwide vote and what impact such an exercise may have on Syria's internal cohesion and international standing. The elections will determine most of the 210 seats in the People's Assembly. These will be voted on via electoral colleges representing each district. However, 1/3 of the seats will be appointed directly by the president. Although the vote does not qualify as a fully popular election, many observers believe it will be seen as an early indication of the new government's intentions, particularly in terms of inclusivity, regional representation and institutional legitimacy. Now, Lamis Jadid, independent international political analyst in Lisbon, Portugal, joins us to discuss further. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, how crucial are these elections for Syria in shaping the country's post-Assad trajectory?
It's a very crucial moment for Syria history, this step, I believe, parliamentarian election for a government that was assigned itself to the country. It will give more legitimacy to the government, of course, if it went as for all Syrian aspiration now for being. Syria is being, even if not geographically, but it's not under the control of the government. We have the northeast, it's under the Kurdish control, SDF. We have the south under the Israeli control now. We don't know about the Druze, how they will vote. We have distrust between the west of the country, the Alawite region, and the government. So we are speaking about crucial moment for the country, for the government, for the people, and we hope that it will include, not exclude, the Syrians. We know, for example, the Kurdish is that they don't have a Syrian identity, for example. They wanted always to be Syrian, and until today they are not considered to be Syrian. And the government in Damascus, they have doubts if any election will happen under the control of the SDF. Is it going truly to be equally representing all the Kurdish voices? So there is trust, and this is between parties. And yes, it's really to a good place for Syria history. Just if there is some goodwill behind the government action, behind the president, what the president truly meant from the legislation of this election, because until today, what we know is third part of the elected parliamentarians, they will be assigned by him, and the other 2/3, they will be assigned by a council that will be assigned by him, and this council has the right to choose people they know and they approve to be the good Syrian or the Syrians that got the trust of the regime in Damascus. So we are recycling, in a way, an old regime, but in an Islamic version that might not give the power to the people, but the whole power is in the hand of God, and the wilaya, it's the representative of God in a political way, let's say it, in the parliament. So it's some kind of shura, it's a council of shura where they could counsel themselves and where they could decide for the future of the country.
Okay, and Lamis, what do you make of the hybrid model that you just very well described, where 2/3 of parliament are elected through pre-selected electoral college voting, while the remaining third is appointed by the president?
it speaks for itself, you know. I mean, it's a recycling for a regime that already we witness. A regime that favored somehow people or the elite that will support this regime, and in exchange they will benefit from this regime. So now we are in a way moving into another type of regime, an Islamic regime, and as the people who appointed themselves as leader of the country, they announced that the revolution, it's an Islamic jihadist revolution. So we are not expecting to have any kind of democracy. I think we are going towards another type of religious autocracy, if we could say. And it says for itself. I think it's recycling for the old regime in Islamic way.
Okay. And Lamis, the postponement of elections in the northeastern regions due to tensions between local authorities, residual SDF structures and Damascus is believed to be highly significant. What are your thoughts on that?
Of course, in the northern part of the country, I think they made some kind of agreement in the 10th of March 2025. It was not put in implementation until today due to some misunderstanding, it seems, until today. But I think the Kurdish card could play a big role in all the plans, the future plan for Syria. And this parliamentarian election will be the striking point, I believe, that we all wait as Syrians to see either for one Syria or the leftover of Syria, or going more into more division in the country.
And lastly, Lamis, could these elections help consolidate the legitimacy of the new government in Damascus? Or conversely, if the process is marred by low turnout or political tension, could it damage the administration's credibility and expose internal fault lines?
Both scenarios are at play for the time being. I think this election might really be the point where either they might have some legitimacy or they might fail. If it fails, it will fall very badly, I think. So it's a very critical exams for the government in Damascus today, and I think they need to prove that they were put for all Syrians. It's excluding all Syrians. I think this is the main task for this government now. While they started themselves excluding all the minorities in the country by attacking the Druze, by attacking the Alawite, by attacking even the Christian villages. And I think all this will make it very difficult task for them to succeed, even if they wanted to.
Okay. Lamis, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Armenia and Azerbaijan have agreed to mutually unblock transport links. Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan says both countries will gain access to each other's transport systems, including railways, roads and other infrastructure. He noted that the shortest link between mainland Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan will serve as a transit route, while Armenia could use Nakhchivan's territory to connect its north and south by railway. Now let's take a look at this in more detail.
After years of closed borders, Armenia and Azerbaijan have agreed to reopen all transport routes between them. Until now, their shared rail lines and highways, including the only land corridor to Azerbaijan's Nakhchivan territory, have been shut since the early 1990s Karabakh War. In effect, Nearly 3 decades of conflict meant closed borders and decades-old blockades that choked regional trade. The war of 2020 between Azerbaijan and Armenia, in addition to leading to the former's victory, gave rise to debate surrounding the opening of communications with the Zangezur corridor and proposed overland passage connecting mainland Azerbaijan and its landlocked Nakhchivan territory via Armenia at the heart of it. After almost 4 years of deadlock, on the 8th of August 2025, parties agreed on the Trump route for international peace and prosperity in Washington. And now in October, Armenia's Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan confirmed at a security forum that both countries will now gain access to each other's infrastructure, railways, highways and transit hubs. For Azerbaijan, this corridor reconnects Nakhchivan directly to the rest of the country. For Armenia, it opens a rare chance to link its north and south by rail via Nakhchivan's territory, a connection it has never had before. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says the agreement is inevitable and sees it as a path to greater regional stability. He also highlights the economic stakes, especially for Armenia's mining sector, which could export more easily once transit is restored. The reopening of these routes is expected to improve trade, travel and regional connections after decades of closure.
Now, Turkey says it has no intention of giving up Russian gas against the backdrop of growing resistance to Russian energy. Turkish Energy Minister Alparslan Bayraktar says the country plans to increase gas imports from Russia, Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan. The minister pointed to existing gas supply agreements with Russia ahead of the winter season. He said access to these resources must be ensured without compromising energy security.
On Friday, Kremlin spoke.
Now, Iran is deepening ties with Russia, China and Turkey as it braces for the return of UN nuclear sanctions. Our correspondent in Tehran, Turaj Shireliliu, has more.
The Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty between Iran and Russia began on Thursday. It lays down enhanced cooperation between Tehran and Moscow in bilateral fields, as well as within regional and international groups such as BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran's foreign ministry said that the two countries will spare no effort to safeguard multilateralism and respect for international law. The treaty consists of 47 articles to work together in technology, information and cybersecurity, peaceful nuclear energy collaboration, and counter-terrorism efforts. It will also focus on regional cooperation, environmental issues, and combating money laundering and organized crime. The treaty will be valid for 20 years after it was concluded in January this year in Moscow by President Masoud Pezeshkian and President Vladimir Putin. As well as strengthening relations with Moscow, Tehran has also signed a comprehensive document on cooperation with Beijing, valid for 25 years. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that China is Iran's comprehensive strategic partner. He also said that regardless of any changes in the international situation, Tehran will continue to deepen its relations with China. And Tehran and Ankara have also discussed bilateral defense ties and regional developments after the Iranian Defense Minister, Brigadier General Aziz Nasirzadeh, visited neighboring Turkey this week. General Nasirzadeh told IRNA that both sides exchanged views on border security, developments in Syria, and Israel threats against the regional countries. He added that both countries' viewpoints were close. This all comes just as the United Nations nuclear sanctions on Iran were reinstated last week. It's despite a joint Russia-China draft resolution at the Security Council proposing a 6-month delay in sanctions. Turaj Shireliliu, Tehran, A News TV.
That's your news update from Baku for now. Make sure you stay tuned to A News for more updates.